That morning's rain wasn't just water, it was a test no one saw coming. Elliot Parker stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 8th time. The navy blue suit he wore was the most expensive thing he had ever owned, paid for with 3 months of barista wages from his night shifts. Today was the most important day of his life, an interview at Breslow and Partners, one of the most prestigious financial firms in Manhattan. He had thoroughly reviewed every possible interview scenario, prepared a market analysis report on Southeast Asia to make an impression, and of course, set 3 alarms. There was absolutely no chance he would be late. The date was circled in red on his calendar with a handwritten note, "The day the future begins." At 7:45 a.m., Elliot left his tiny studio apartment, carrying a leather portfolio he treated like a sacred relic. The sky was only slightly overcast, with no sign of what was to come. But by the time he emerged from the subway station 6 blocks from the Breslow building, the rain had already started. At first, it was a light drizzle. Then, suddenly, it poured as if someone had ripped the sky wide open. The wind howled, and the rain came down like a waterfall, flipping umbrellas inside out and turning the streets into rivers of freezing brown slush. Elliot clutched the portfolio tight against his chest, running along the sidewalk as rain poured down the back of his collar and soaked his shirt. Water trickled down his spine, and his carefully polished shoes were now flooded, squishing with every step. 8:45 a.m. There was still time if nothing else went wrong. He ducked into a nearby coffee shop to take shelter and quickly opened his ride-hailing app. Every option showed the same message: no cars available. A taxi useless. The streets were chaos. People were either crammed under awnings or stuck bumper to bumper in an ocean of honking cars and red brake lights. By 9:05 he was out of options. Elliot made a decision he would run to the building, soaking wet, wind whipping against his face. He had to make it. He had to show up. And then, as his heart pounded in his chest, rain slamming against his face, and the precious documents in his hands turning soggy and limp, he heard it. A voice faint, trembling, and soaked in frustration. Damn it! This stupid tire. He turned, just a few steps away. Beside a sleek black sedan stood an elderly man struggling with a completely flat tire. A small car jack teetered uselessly beneath the car, barely gripping the slick pavement. No one else was around. No one stopped. Everyone had their heads down, running past. It was as if the old man was invisible. Elliot glanced at his watch. 9:18 a.m. He was late, very late. And if he kept running, maybe, just maybe, he could still make it. Maybe he'd only be 10 minutes late. But a voice, one that didn't come from a hiring manager or from his logical mind, but from somewhere deeper, whispered to him, "True character doesn't show up on a resume. It shows up in the choices you make when no one's watching." And Elliot Parker stopped. He had no way of knowing that the very action that seemed destined to cost him everything would become the one thing that changed everything. Because the man stranded in the storm was the one person who could change Elliot's life with a single handshake. Elliot Parker wasn't born into the gleaming towers of the financial world. He grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in Camden, where his mother, Irene Parker, worked night shifts as a nurse and waited tables on weekends. His father walked out when Elliot was in second grade. Every winter, Elliot and his mum would heat buckets of water in the microwave to bathe because the water heater had broken and they couldn't afford to fix it. The only thing Elliot ever had was determination. In high school, he was always the last student to leave the library. At New Jersey State, a school that wasn't famous, but fiercely competitive, he graduated with honors while working 30 hours a week at a local coffee shop. He had no relatives in banking, no internship on Wall Street, no Ivy League credentials. But he had something else: grit. And for 6 months after graduation, Elliot submitted applications to 124 finance firms. 122 never responded. One sent a rejection email. Only Breslow and Partners, the firm every finance student called the Ivory Tower, surprisingly invited him for an interview. Elliot read that email at least 23 times that day, each time wondering if he was dreaming. He immediately printed his resume on the finest paper he could afford, bought premium mock interview software, and spent 4 evenings crafting a 90-second self-introduction that felt authentic and sharp. The navy blue suit, Elliot's most expensive possession, was a gamble instead of paying early for his CFA certification course. He chose to invest in that first impression, believing that, at a place like Breslow, how you showed up mattered just as much as what you knew. In his heart. That interview day, April 15th, was the doorway to a world he had never truly believed he could enter. A world of glass elevators, marble-covered floors, and numbers streaming across Bloomberg screens like blood flowing through the veins of the financial markets. He knew he didn't have the right to mess up. He couldn't be late. He couldn't show up looking sloppy. He couldn't let anyone see where he came from. And yet, there was something else in his heart, something his mother had instilled in him since he was a child. You can be poor, son, but you can never afford to be unkind. That single sentence had followed him everywhere, from the bar where he wiped tables late at night, to the library where he quietly helped an elderly manager rearrange books no one else cared to touch. And now it was knocking at his heart again as he stood in front of a choice: walk past an old man stranded in the rain, or give up something he had spent a lifetime preparing for. Elliot Parker wasn't a hero. He was just a young man who believed doing the right thing didn't require an audience. But fate sometimes watches those who think no one is. The weather forecast from the night before had casually said light showers scattered in a few areas. Elliot hadn't given it a second thought. Drizzle couldn't possibly ruin the most important day of his life. But what came down over Manhattan that morning wasn't just rain, it was the full fury of the sky itself. At 800 a.m., Elliot stepped out of the subway station on the 41st Street, just 6 blocks from the Breslow building. In his hand was a sleek black portfolio, holding everything: his resume, letters of recommendation, a detailed market analysis, and the hopes of a young man who had bet it all. The sky darkened with uncanny speed. Rain began to fall in gentle drops. Then suddenly, as if someone had pulled a massive curtain of water across the entire city. It came crashing down. Wind howled along the avenue, whipping up flyers, plastic bags, and twisted umbrellas. People scattered, sprinting for cover. Storefronts overflowed with soaked commuters. Sidewalks turned slick and dangerous. Cars crawled bumper to bumper in every direction. Elliot ducked into a coffee shop for shelter. His white dress shirt was now blotched with water. The navy blue suit hung heavy on his frame. The portfolio he held close to his chest began to leak rain seeping in around the edges, smudging the dark ink beneath the plastic sleeve. He opened the rideshare app. No luck. No cars available in your area. He switched to the taxi app, same result. The nearest drivers were either stuck in gridlock or had gone offline due to overload. 8:25 Exactly 1 hour left until his interview. Elliot didn't give up. He pulled up the map and recalculated his walking route. If he cut through 7th Avenue and crossed Herald Square, it might only take 22 minutes. He made the decision he would run. Rain splashed against his face. The soaked portfolio clung to his chest. His leather shoes slipped with every step. But Elliot clenched his teeth and pushed forward. Each stride carried a silent chant, "Don't give up, not today." Along the way, Elliot saw a scene both familiar and foreign. People with furrowed brows, shouting into phones, heads down, shoving through the crowds, each of them fighting their own invisible storm. And then, a taxi, the only one he'd seen. It had just dropped off a passenger and had its light on available. Elliot shouted, waving his arms, sprinting toward it. But from across the street, another man soaked, his blazer unbuttoned and flapping, charged at the same time. He got there first, slammed the door shut just as Elliot's hand touched the handle. The cab sped off, spraying filthy street water behind it, leaving Elliot standing in the middle of the curbside, flood-cold liquid seeping through his shoes, soaking his socks. 9:05. "You're late," a voice inside his head screamed. 3 blocks to go. If you run like hell, you can still make it. Elliot took a deep breath, gripped his soaked portfolio to his chest, and kept going head down, feet splashing through puddles. Inside him, a quiet battle raged between the dream he'd carried for years and the storm that was trying to wash it away, between punctuality and a deeper, stubborn belief in something more. And in that very moment, as the rain poured harder, the wind screamed, and his heart pounded in his ears. Elliot heard a metallic clatter, a car jack slipping from under a frame, followed by a low, weary groan. The groan wasn't loud, but in the middle of the storm, it rang out like a bell in Elliot's chest. He turned and froze. Next to a sleek luxury sedan, an elderly man with silver hair was kneeling in the street, struggling with a flat tire. The jack had toppled over, sliding out from under the chassis on the rain-slick pavement. He wore an expensive overcoat, now drenched and plastered to his back. His hands, shaking from the cold, were trying to lift the car's frame again, but it was no use. The old man panted, muttering under his breath, Damn, this rusty old thing. Elliot froze. For one long, silent moment, everything else disappeared. His watch read 9:18 a.m. The Breslow building was still 3 blocks away. The interview was at 9:30. If he kept running, he might only be a few minutes late. There was still a chance. But he glanced back at the old man. No one had stopped. People hurried past like he didn't exist, like he was part of the sidewalk. The rain slapped their faces and his as if the sky had chosen to punish the vulnerable. A voice inside Elliot whispered, "Go. You don't owe him anything. This is your future. You've spent your whole life preparing for today." But another voice, one not born of logic, but of memory, spoke louder, clearer. His mother's voice, "Elliot, you don't need money to be a good person. But if you want to be a real man, do what's right, even when no one's watching." He took a breath deep, steady, and exhaled, as if releasing every doubt in his chest. "Sir, let me help you." The old man looked up. His eyes were wet, not just from rain, but from something else. Gratitude. Oh, thank God. I thought nobody cared anymore. Without hesitation, Elliot placed his portfolio in the back seat, hoping at least some part of it was still dry. He took off his suit jacket and laid it on the pavement, kneeling on it to keep from slipping. Grabbing the jack with steady hands, he placed it correctly and started turning. "You shouldn't be out in the rain like this, sir. Haven't missed a day of work in 47 years. I figured a little rain wasn't going to stop me today." The old man gave a soft chuckle, his voice shaky, but full of quiet pride. Elliot let out a short laugh of his own. "I get it. Today's the biggest day of my life, too." "Then why'd you stop?" Elliot didn't answer right away. His hands kept working. The car slowly began to rise. "Because if I'd walked away from you, everything I wrote in my application letter would have meant nothing." The rain kept falling, but it no longer felt cold. Inside, Elliot felt something warm start to rise, not from his soaked clothes, but from the peace of knowing he'd made the right choice. Just a few minutes later, the spare tire was on. Elliot, now soaked to the bone, pants streaked with mud, hands covered in grease, looked down at himself and gave a half smile. He barely looked like someone headed to a job interview anymore. 9:27 a. Interview. Probably late by now, but the old man smiled, eyes filled with something deeper than thanks. Respect. You really know your way around a jack. Spent one summer in my uncle's garage back in 11th grade. I can give you a ride to your interview. It's close. Call it a thank you." Elliot hesitated. He glanced at his watch. 9:33. Late, but maybe still time to explain. "I'd really appreciate that, sir. Thank you." They got in the car. Elliot had no idea that the man behind the wheel was the founder of Breslow and Partners, the financial firm where one phone call from him could change anyone's future. And that day, he had just found something far more valuable than any resume: a kind soul. The black sedan glided smoothly through the flooded streets. Elliot sat in the passenger seat, trying not to soak the elegant leather interior. His drenched portfolio rested on his lap. His white dress shirt had turned nearly transparent, clinging to his skin. His hair was a mess from the wind. In the rearview mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked like someone who had just crawled out of a nightmare. "My name's Elliot. Elliot Parker. Nice name." The old man smiled, eyes still fixed on the road. "I'm Alden." A strange name, vaguely familiar. Elliot didn't think much of it. His mind was busy crafting what he might say to the hiring panel if he still got the chance to see them. "My interview's at Breslow and Partners at 9:30, about 6 buildings from here." A short pause. "I know the place. Old firm. Serious people. They expect precision to the minute." "Yeah," Elliot nodded. "They don't usually hire people outside the Ivy League. I went to New Jersey State, so this opportunity means the world to me. If I'm late, they might not even let me through the door." The old man stayed silent. The windshield wipers swiped back and forth with a rhythm like a countdown ticking in the background. "And you still stopped?" he asked quietly. Elliot stared straight ahead. "Because you needed help." It was a short answer, sharp, clean, like a single cut. No explanation, no need for praise. Alden glanced sideways at him, not with the eyes of an old man who had needed a hand, but with the gaze of someone who had seen a lot and was watching something rare. "Let me ask you something, straight up. If I'd been kneeling beside an old Civic instead of a luxury car, would you still have stopped?" Elliot looked surprised. "Honestly, sir, I didn't even notice what kind of car you were driving. All I saw was someone who needed help, and the rain was just too much." The old man smiled. It was a soft smile, a very human one. "Yeah, you really didn't notice." They both fell silent, eyes turning to the city outside the window. The rain had begun to ease. The sky was still a blanket of grey, but somewhere, light was breaking through. "I don't know if they'll turn me away," Elliot said quietly. "But at least I won't regret anything." "Why not?" Alden asked. "Because I can always find another job. But if I had walked past someone who needed help today, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror." This time, the old man said nothing, but the look he gave Elliot, it was as if he were etching something into memory, something far deeper than any resume could ever convey. The car rolled to a stop in front of the Breslow building, 85 stories tall, its glass surface reflecting the grey sky like a massive mirror. Elliot swallowed hard. He was about to walk into the place that could define the course of his future, looking like someone who'd been dragged out of a storm drain. He turned toward the old man. "Thank you for the ride, and for understanding why I had to stop." Alden gave a subtle nod. "Character doesn't show up when you're standing on a stage. It shows up in the moments when no one's watching. And you made the right choice." Elliot smiled, opened the door, and stepped out. His shoes squelched with every move, soaked through, but inside there was an unexpected stillness, a strange, steady kind of peace. He didn't know, that the man behind the wheel was the founder and current CEO of Breslow and Partners, and the interview Elliot thought he had already missed was still happening. Just not in the way he had expected. It was taking place on another level, quiet, unspoken, and more meaningful than any formal question could have been. The car door shut behind him. Elliot stood before the towering structure Breslow and Partners, a fortress of glass and steel reaching into the sky. The rain had eased, but the pavement was still dotted with pools of grey water. With every step, he could hear the wet squish of his waterlogged shoes. 9:36 a.m. He was 6 minutes late, but he walked inside, not running, not apologizing, just walking each step clear, deliberate, like someone ready to accept whatever outcome awaited. Inside, the lobby was cold, gleaming, and pristine, polished like it had been cleaned with money. Elliot, soaked to the bone, dishevelled, hair tousled, stood out like an ink blot on a white shirt. The receptionist, a young woman in a perfectly fitted suit, her name tag reading Clara, looked up from her screen, eyes pausing when she saw his condition. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "My name is Elliot Parker. I have a 9:30 interview with Human Resources." She checked the list. "Yes, you are on the schedule, but you're late. And Mr. Brennan has already moved on to his next meeting." Elliot nodded. "I understand, but, if possible, I just ask for 3 minutes to explain. That's all I need." Clara's brow furrowed slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Mr. Brennan's calendar is fully booked for the rest of the afternoon, and the recruitment policy here is quite strict about punctuality. I can take your documents and forward them in case another opportunity opens up." Elliot exhaled softly. All the effort from the past several months now reduced to one courteous phrase, "in case another opportunity opens up." He opened his portfolio, pulling out a printed resume, slightly damp, but still legible. He held it out with both hands. "Please forward this for me. And if you can, please let him know I'm sorry. I was here early, but I stopped to help an elderly man who was changing a tire in the middle of the storm. I know that doesn't erase the fact that I was late, but it is the truth." Clara looked at him again. There was something in Elliot's eyes, wet, disappointed, but not bitter, not pleading. That softened her, just slightly. "I'll pass on the message." He nodded and offered a quiet smile. "Thank you." And then Elliot turned and walked away. His soaked suit clung to him. His heart felt like it was dragging a stone. He didn't cry, but there was a tightness in his throat, like he had just lost something massive that no one else could see. Inside his head, a voice echoed, "If you had kept going, you might have been in that room, presenting your market analysis, maybe even landing your dream job." But another voice, quieter but unwavering, answered, "You may have been late to the interview, but you were right on time with your conscience. And that was still worth holding on to, even if it meant starting again from zero." 3 days passed since that rainy morning. Now, the sky was bright and dry sunlight, crisp and cold, as if no storm had ever existed. But in Elliot's heart, there remained a lingering dampness, a quiet sense of loss that hadn't yet dried. He sat at the small table in his studio apartment, soft light filtering through the worn-out curtain. His navy blue suit, cleaned and dry, hung neatly behind the closet door. The leather portfolio, once his lucky charm, now lay flat on the desk, still marked by faint water stains, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. His laptop sat open, the browser already on the City Finance Careers page. In the past 2 days, Elliot had applied to 14 companies. Most of them were smaller firms, lower salaries, shared office spaces in basements or old buildings. But at this point, Elliot wasn't picky. He just needed a chance, any chance. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Mom. Elliot hesitated for a beat before answering. He hadn't told her that he had lost his shot at Breslow and Partners. Hey, sweetheart, how'd it go? How was the interview? Elliot gripped the edge of the table. Her voice was still cheerful, still full of hope. He swallowed the lump of guilt rising in his throat. Mom. Actually? The phone beeped another incoming call. A strange number. Area code 212 Manhattan. His heart pounded. Mom, I've got another call. Might be about a job. Can I call you back? Of course. Baby, let me know what they say. Okay. He switched lines. This is Elliot Parker speaking. The woman's voice was crisp, professional. Good afternoon, Mr. Parker. This is Sandra Mitchell, Senior Executive Assistant at Breslow and Partners. Elliot sat bolt upright. Yes, this is he. I've been instructed to arrange a private meeting between you and the Senior Executive Board. The meeting is scheduled for today at 2:00 p.m. on the 85th floor of the main headquarters. The 85th floor. Elliot could barely process what he'd just heard. That wasn't where normal interviews happened. That was the executive floor reserved for the CEO, vice presidents, and board of directors. I'm sorry. I thought I'd been rejected. There was a pause. I don't have any details on that. I was simply asked to schedule an urgent appointment for you. I'll be there. Thank you. Ms. Mitchell. The call ended. Elliot stared at his phone, 1,000 thoughts spinning. Why the 85th floor? Who had made this request? And then a face appeared in his mind. The old man, the drenched overcoat, the trembling hands but piercing eyes, the slow, deliberate way of speaking, and the name, Alden. A flash of suspicion hit him wild, bold, but impossible to shake. Elliot sprang to his feet, opened his closet, and reached for the suit that had just finished drying. He wasn't going to let this chance slip through his hands, no matter how strange its arrival. Today, no storm was going to stop him. 1:53 p.m. Elliot stepped out of the taxi, this time in a clean, dry navy blue suit. His hair was neat. A fresh, unwrinkled resume was tucked firmly under his arm. No water stains, no folds, no scars from the past. The Breslow and Partners building towered above him once again. But this time, it didn't feel daunting. This time, he wasn't arriving with a standard appointment from Human Resources. He was here on an invitation from whom, as soon as he stepped into the lobby, Elliot was greeted by name by the security guard. "Good afternoon, Mr. Parker. Here's your temporary access badge for the 85th floor. Have a great afternoon." The private elevator, one that serviced only the executive level, glided upward in perfect silence. Elliot felt like he was entering a different world, higher, farther, and somehow beyond reach. The doors opened. The 85th floor didn't resemble any office Elliot had ever seen. No rows of desks, no employees hunched over keyboards. Instead, there was polished hardwood flooring, soft recessed lighting glowing golden from the ceiling, original paintings adorning the walls, and floor-to-ceiling glass windows revealing a breathtaking panorama of New York City. A woman in a tailored grey suit approached, her face calm, her voice precise. "Mr. Parker, I'm Sandra Mitchell. Please follow me." Elliot nodded and walked with her down a hushed hallway. The walls were lined with black and white photographs marking milestones of the company from its founding in 1937 to recent multi-billion-dollar deals. At the end of the hallway stood a pair of ebony double doors. Ms. Mitchell knocked gently. "Sir, Elliot Parker has arrived." A deep, warm voice answered from inside. "Send him in." She opened the door. Elliot stepped through. The room was expansive, with high ceilings and a grand walnut desk positioned beside a massive window. A leather chair sat turned away from him, and then the chair slowly rotated. Elliot's heart nearly stopped. It was him, the old man, Alden, but no longer the image of a weary figure struggling with a carjack in the storm. Sitting before Elliot now was Alden Breslow, legendary CEO, founder of Breslow and Partners, one of the most powerful names in American finance. Elliot stood frozen, his throat dry as dust. "Good to see you again, Elliot." Alden smiled that same smile from the rain. Only now, it was in a room where decisions had the power to shake global stock markets. "I believe we had an unfinished conversation." Elliot struggled to find his voice. I didn't know. I had no idea you were." "I know. That's exactly why I wanted to see you again." Alden stood, his frame small, but carrying a quiet force that filled the room. He stepped out from behind the desk, extended his hand. "That day, you didn't help me because you knew who I was, and that is exactly why I asked you here today." Elliot shook his hand, those same warm hands from that rainy morning. Only this time, they carried the weight of an empire. "You know," Alden said slowly, "I hadn't driven myself to work in over 30 years. That morning, I just wanted to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. And then the tire went flat. The skies opened up, and you were the only one who stopped." Elliot stood still, his heart pounding, everything inside him cracking open at once. It wasn't the rain that had soaked through everything that day. It was this moment, when he realized that the very act he thought had cost him everything had actually opened the door to a world he'd never even dared to imagine. The room felt suspended in time. Elliot still couldn't fully believe he was standing in the office of the legendary Alden Breslow, a name he'd only ever seen in high-level finance articles or in black-and-white portraits inside dusty textbooks. Alden stepped over to a cabinet and pulled out a worn leather folder, the same portfolio Elliot had left behind in his car during the storm. "You forgot this." He placed it on the desk and gave it a gentle pat. "I read your entire Southeast Asia market report. A promising strategic assessment, not flashy, but practical, sharp." Elliot swallowed. "Thank you. But that report alone doesn't earn me a seat in this room." Alden nodded, his gaze sharpening. "You're right. Your report was solid but not rare. You're not the only one with top grades or a smart market analysis. We get hundreds of resumes each week. Many come from people with MBAs from Harvard, Wharton, people with internships at top investment banks, people with family money behind them." He paused, holding Elliot's eyes. And this time, the look wasn't that of a CEO, but of a man searching for something valuable in a world that had forgotten how to slow down. "But what I'm looking for isn't in a resume, can't be measured by GPA, can't be listed under extracurriculars, doesn't show up in the 3-minute answer to, 'Where do you see yourself in 5 years?'" He crossed his arms and turned toward the massive window, looking out at the clear blue sky that had finally returned after the storm. It shows up in the moment the rain is pouring like hell, and no one else stops. It shows up when someone helps a stranger, even if it means being late to a meeting that might define their entire future. Elliot didn't speak. Something rose in his chest, something that felt like awe and disbelief colliding at once. Like maybe this was all too good to be real. "Elliot." Alden turned, his voice steady and low. "I built this company on one truth. Finance runs on logic. But leadership runs on character. Money can be made in 1,000 ways, but reputation, real reputation, only lasts when a leader chooses what's right, even when it costs them." He placed his hand on Elliot's portfolio, then continued. "We have one of the strictest resume screening systems in the industry, but no system can measure character. And that's why I still drive to work, still walk the streets, still put myself in places algorithms can't reach." A heavy silence settled in the room. Elliot felt as though he was standing at a crossroads no map had ever drawn, a place where kindness didn't earn extra credit, but quietly unlocked a door that hundreds more qualified than him had never even seen. "You didn't know who I was, and you helped anyway. No cameras, no selfies, no need for thanks." Alden stepped closer, and for the first time, placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder, a touch full of trust, and something even deeper belief. "And that is exactly why I want to invite you to join Breslow and Partners. Not as a temp, not as an intern, but as someone I trust." Elliot's mouth fell open. "What? What would I do? I want you to be my special assistant, to learn from the very top, to see everything through the eyes of someone who's never had privilege handed to them, and to remind me when I forget what really matters. With every word, the room seemed to expand, not just in space, but in possibility. Elliot didn't know what kind of dream he'd stumbled into, but if this was a dream, he never wanted to wake up. He stood there, frozen between two worlds. One, a damp apartment with unpaid bills and second-hand furniture. The other, the 85th floor of Breslow and Partners, where decisions shaped the flow of global finance. I'm not sure I deserve this, he said quietly. Alden smiled as if he'd been waiting for that. Deserving isn't something you start with. Deserving is something you build through your choices. And you just made one of the hardest ones there is, to do what's right, even when it meant losing everything. He walked over to his desk and returned with a thick folder. He placed it in front of Elliot. This is your contract. Title: Special Assistant to the CEO. Starting salary triple that of a new analyst. Full benefits. The schedule: not easy. The pressure immense. But the learning limitless. Elliot stared at the folder, his hands trembling. Everything he had ever dreamed of, not just the paycheck, but the chance to walk through a door that was never meant for someone like him, was right here. But I've never worked in a senior-level environment, he stammered. I don't have real experience. I don't know how to lead. I don't even know how to sit in a boardroom without feeling out of place. Alden nodded. I know. And that is exactly why this position exists. He sat back down on the other side of the desk, his hands laced together, like a man carefully passing on the weight of something lasting, not just responsibility, but legacy. I don't need someone perfect. I need someone real. Someone who can sit in a room full of experts and ask, have we forgotten the human element in this plan? A moment of silence. Elliot clutched the contract tightly. Then he looked up, his voice rough but steady. I won't promise to know everything, but I promise to learn. And I won't forget who I am, or why I've been given this chance. Alden reached out, not like a CEO welcoming a new employee, but like a leader inviting someone to step forward and carry the flame. So, do we have an agreement? Elliot took that hand firm. Certain. Yes, sir. We have an agreement. And in that moment, the storm from 3 days ago vanished. No more soaked suit, no more wrinkled resume, no more skeptical glances from the lobby receptionist, only Elliot, a young man who once thought he had lost everything, now standing in a place few ever reach. Because of one simple thing. He didn't walk past someone who needed help, even when no one was watching. Monday morning, clear skies, no rain, no wind, just Elliot, in a fresh new suit, standing outside the lobby of Breslow and Partners, his name printed on a company badge, Elliot Parker, Special Assistant to CEO, a small tag, crisp lettering, but to Elliot it carried the weight of trust. The same security guard from before smiled and greeted him. Welcome to your first day, Mr. Parker, Elliot smiled back, nodding, still not used to the respect in that voice. A few weeks ago, he'd been the guy dripping rainwater all over this marble floor. Today, he was walking in through a different door, opened not by a resume, but by a choice. The elevator carried him smoothly to the 85th floor. Ms. Mitchell was waiting for him, handing him a brand new laptop and a company phone. Mr. Breslow is expecting you in his office. And this morning, you'll be joining the quarterly strategy board meeting. Elliot paused, startled. I'll be joining. Already. She smiled. This position isn't for sitting on the sidelines. Elliot, he believes in you, and he wants you to begin now. Alden's office looked exactly as it had that first time, quiet, neat, lit gently by the glow of morning sun. He looked up as Elliot entered, smiling, right on time. Good. I told you I would be, Elliot replied. Alden nodded, pleased. You'll see a few tough faces today. Some won't understand why I chose a young man without going through the board. But don't let that silence you. I don't need you to impress them. I need you to remain. You, 85th floor, conference room. A long conference table made of polished mahogany stretched before him. Seated around it were 16 faces, men and women alike, each of them veterans with at least 2 decades in the financial world. Starched collars, sharp ties, steely eyes that didn't flinch easily. Alden stood, his voice calm, resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Elliot Parker, my new special assistant. He will be attending all strategic meetings from today onward. A silver-haired director raised a skeptical brow. Mr. Breslow, I don't recall the board approving this position. Alden smiled faintly. When you've spent 3 decades as CEO, you'll understand. Some decisions are made before they're explained. No one spoke further. The meeting began. Data flashed across the large screen spreadsheets, graphs, financial models, profit reports. Everything Elliot had once studied in textbooks was now unfolding in real time. He listened. He observed. He took notes. He learned. Until the topic shifted to a struggling manufacturing company Breslow had invested in 5 years ago. The financials are unfavorable, said the CFO. We should divest, exit, minimize losses. Another executive agreed. High maintenance cost, low profit efficiency. Elliot looked up. Alden turned to him. Elliot, what's your take? A pause swept through the room. Elliot looked around. Every eye was on him. A young man, not even a full day into the job, being asked to speak before some of the sharpest minds in the business. He took a breath. I grew up in Camden. There was a factory there. Then it shut down. At first, it was just lost jobs. Then came lost homes. Then lost schools. Then the whole community vanished. The room was completely silent. I'm not saying keeping this company is the most profitable option, but if there's a way to restructure, preserve jobs, and still reach long-term financial stability, I think that's worth exploring. Alden nodded slowly. Exactly why I brought you here. He turned back to the board. Form a task group to evaluate restructuring options. Elliot will work directly with James and Claudia. Some eyebrows rose, but no one objected. And in that moment, Elliot knew he hadn't just stepped into the room, he had started to leave a mark. 1 week after that first meeting, Elliot Parker still couldn't fully believe the life he was now living. He had moved out of his old studio apartment, now renting a modest but brighter place closer to the firm. He still woke up early, but now, instead of brewing coffee for customers at 6 a.m., he was crafting strategy slides for the CEO. Life had changed fast, but Elliot refused to let it sweep him away, because he knew what brought him here wasn't a prestigious degree. It wasn't genius-level investment skills. It was a simple choice. He stopped in the rain. 1 week. That's all it took for whispers to spread through the firm about Alden Breslow's unvetted assistant. But in just 1 week, Elliot proved something powerful, that young people don't need to shout to be heard, don't need to step on others to rise. They only need one thing: to stay true to themselves. Friday afternoon. The sun slanted through Alden's office windows in soft golden beams. Elliot stepped in after finalizing the draft proposal for the factory restructuring, a plan that recommended preserving 70% of the workforce, instead of laying off everyone, as the original model proposed. Alden greeted him with a look filled with quiet pride. "You've done well. I just spoke from what I've seen," Elliot replied. Alden stood, bracing his hands against the glass, looking out over the city that pulsed beneath them. "Elliot, over 40 years ago, I was you, standing in front of a world that wasn't made for me, and someone, much like I am today, gave me a chance. I don't need you to pay me back. I need you to carry that gift forward." Elliot nodded. "I understand. One day." Alden turned to him. "There'll be another young person. No connections, no titles, but something inside them worth believing in. And I want you, when you're in the position, to remember today." Elliot tightened his grip on the folder in his hand. He said nothing, but inside him there was a vow, one that didn't need to be spoken. He would never forget where he came from. He would never forget who he was, even in a world that glittered with distraction and illusion. That evening, Elliot went home early. He made himself a cup of coffee, a habit from another life, then sat down to write an email to his mom. "Mum, I didn't tell you everything about that day. I didn't make it to the interview on time, but I stopped to help an old man change his tire in the rain, and, Mum, he turned out to be the CEO of the company I applied to. I don't know why that happened. But maybe, sometimes, fate just wants to know what you'll choose when no one's watching, and I'm glad I chose right. Are you on a journey like Elliot's? Maybe you're applying for jobs, feeling disheartened because you don't have connections, didn't attend a prestigious school, or wondering if kindness even matters in a cutthroat world. But remember, this one quiet act of kindness, unseen by anyone, can open doors you never imagined. A person who stops in the rain, when no one else does, may already be seen by someone greater. And sometimes, you don't need to run faster than everyone else to reach the finish line. You just need to stop at the right moment for the right person. If you're rushing through today, don't forget to look around, because the person you pass in the rain might just be the door you've been looking for. And if you're feeling small, invisible, unseen, please believe this: someone is watching, not to judge you, but to offer a chance to those who've managed to keep their heart intact in a world that's forgotten how to slow down.